welcome to our new podcast. This time I'm very happy to be joined by Sue Rich. Just to let everyone know, All In Skills is a soon-to-be launched platform which is being aimed at young people, undergraduates, recent graduates, people new on the job market, who are going to be able to use the platform to connect with people with experience and backgrounds in a variety of different careers, including Sue. And Sue, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Pleasure.
Sue, what I normally do is invite people just to give us a little bit of information about who you are, where you are, and what your background is, your work background.
Okay, so born and bred in London, proud to be born and bred in London, married with 5 children, which never really stopped me from working. I gave a lot of time to my career, gave up a lot of time for my career when the children were growing up, but managed to feed in a role in between all the obligations I had to the children. They came first. Never got to university because I was moved from one part of the country to another by parents that didn't really understand what it was all about. But I, over my career, managed to get qualified in human resource management, which sort of led the way to my career going forward. Thrill of my life really was managing a volunteer program for the Met Police, but that was based on my experience working for victim support within the courts, where I again led a program supporting victims and witnesses who came to court to give evidence. Through that experience, I joined the Met full-time, initially looking at the witness experience and supporting the team that were trying to improve that for the Met. But that led to my designing and leading on a volunteer program for the Met, leading up to the Olympic Games, which was a real thrill. Now, this wasn't the volunteer program that everybody knows about, which was actually sponsored by City Hall and Boris Johnson. This was a Met Police volunteer program, so we were very much behind the scenes. But nonetheless, I had about 2,000 community-based volunteers, 40 managers spread across the Met. And we all came together supporting the Met up and down the country when they were responsible for policing the games. And we were behind the scenes doing what we could do to smooth things over. So that was really the career. That was the one I look back on with some pride. But the reason I got to that role was because I sort of did my own thing and I was allowed to manage the program in the way I thought best, based on my victim support experience of how people were impacted by crime, how it left them emotionally way after the trial. In fact, it was after the trial that lots of the problems started because everything built up to the trial and then it went a bit flat afterwards. So a lot of experience about the impact of crime on people, a lot of experience about the value of volunteering, and I'm really passionate about value of volunteering. I volunteered today. It opens so many doors in ways. Well, I wouldn't have had the job with the Met if I hadn't volunteered, because that's how I got into the victim support team. So now I'm retired. I've got grandchildren, children. I'm a lady that lunches nearly every day of the week with girlfriends. I've just celebrated my 77th birthday and life's great.
Excellent.
So that's a bit about me.
Can you just give us a little bit of context for those people who are listening to us who are not from the UK or not familiar with the terminology? Just give us a little bit of information about the Metropolitan Police, because it is an absolutely massive organisation.
One of the things I learned very quickly when I got involved with them was how far-reaching their good work is. And to people who don't have any reason to meet up with the police, they used to be Bobby's on the beat arresting the bad uns and getting them to court. There is so much more going on behind the scenes in terms of community engagement, preventing crime, helping reduce the fear of crime. Anything to do with the aftermath of crime, you'll find that the police are well behind it, but they don't publicise their efforts. They don't get lauded for their efforts. We only hear about the times it all goes wrong. And of course it goes wrong. There's some 35,000 employees in the Met. So of course it goes wrong sometimes. But I can't say good enough things about the value of the work that I've seen them undertake without any lauding, really. So every borough in London, 30 plus boroughs in London, each has its own police team, but they're managed by area managers, and the area managers are called borough superintendents, and they report through a hierarchy, and it is layers of hierarchy to the commissioner, who has overall responsibility, and the commissioner reports to the Mayor of London. So Met Police is everywhere. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's not getting the resources it needs to do the job I was part of. The volunteer programme I was involved in has really depleted. There were always three volunteering programmes within the Met. There were the special constables, who are police officers in all but being paid. They're trained in the same way. They wear their uniforms. They go out on the same jobs as regular police officers do. They're the cadets, who are the young people coming through who want to know more about policing, and they're a bit like scouts. And then there was my programme that I introduced. I took over from a really lovely lady who got it off the ground, and I developed it when I came on board in 5, I think it was. And I developed it, and I ended up with the 40 managers. And unfortunately, it hasn't got the same clout as it did, because the Olympic Games needed all these people in to support what the police were needing to do.
And just to remind people that the Olympic Games, we're talking about the 2012
Yes, the
Olympic
2012 London Olympic Game, of course.
Yes.
Games.
The Games. All
The
the
best.
others are, by the by.
Sorry
That's
about
excellent.
Austria.
So you got to the position with the MPS through victim support. That came first, did it?
Yes, victim support did come first, but victim support was very limited in terms of working in a court and supporting victims and witnesses coming to court. That's what I was doing. I was managing a magistrate's court. Having been as a volunteer in a Crown Court, I was then moved to a paid role in a magistrate's court and developed the programme in the magistrate's court. And it was through that I got to know the local borough commander, who had a lump of money every year to develop community engagement within the borough. And he came and had a chat to me and said, I think you and I should be talking about extending what you're doing in the court to people who are coming into the police service. I didn't even know where to go for my interview with him, because I'd never met the police, I'd never dealt with the police. And that's the case for so many members of the public who really don't know anything about policing, and why would they? So that was part of my role, was to actually help develop the public's awareness and the use of their local police service. And it sort of went on from there.
You at the beginning, you touched on something I thought that was quite interesting, and that was to do with the fact that you said that you didn't go straight to university. The first question I'd like to ask is, was that to do with a sort of a societal expectation, a family thing?
Yeah, I'll tell you what happened, exactly what happened. I was born to parents who weren't educated particularly, and really, although I think in the back of their minds the university education was valuable, it wasn't really the focus, it wasn't really the drive. But I went to grammar school, did my O-levels, and I went to do 3 A-levels, and I was going to do languages at university, was where I was hoping to go. And as part of that enterprise, I was doing French and English and Spanish. I think it was my family, arranged an exchange for me with a family in Casablanca in Morocco, where I was meant to be going for the 6-week summer holidays to improve my French. But that 6 weeks turned into more like 7 or 8 months, because I got on so well with the family and I taught the children. There was 4 or 5 youngsters in the family. I mean, I was about 16, 17. I taught them all to speak early English, and we got on really well. And then their son came back to my family for a few months as an exchange. What nobody thought to tell me was they were moving, and they moved from Surrey to Essex, which was quite a leap. But also that meant that my education was fractured, because the school that I went to when I came back in Essex didn't offer the same board of A-levels as the one in Surrey, which my parents hadn't understood. So when I came back and wanted to continue with my 3 A-levels, I could only do 2 because they didn't offer Spanish. And so I couldn't go to university with just 2 A-levels. I got them, but it wasn't enough. And that's why I never went to university. And it's something I've always regretted, because a degree isn't just about the subject. It's about the fact you can show that you're disciplined, that you can sustain an interest, that you can manage a longer term project. It was on the experience that I had that I made sure that my children all did university degrees, and they all did for that very reason. And also because on the back of my experience as a sabbatical in a foreign country, amazing. I still think about it even today. My kids did the same.
So how common was it to actually do something like that? I imagine at the time it was quite unusual.
But I am a bit of a one-off. And when they said, it was all legitimate, and come for 6 weeks and be with our family, and then our son will come home to your family in London for 6 weeks. One day the father of the family said, would I mind and would I like to stay on and become their au pair, really is what it was, if my parents agreed. So he telephoned my parents and I spoke to my parents and I said, well, I'd be happy. Me not really understanding what it meant to my ongoing education. I stayed. And I went to fairs and I went to Marrakesh and I sat next to a man holding a calf, a newborn calf in the bus. It's incredible what I did. Could never let any of my children do it. I would not, for things that I got up to, I'd rather
Well,
not know if they did.
that's quite interesting. What is it then about that experience that you perhaps are more reluctant that your children not share that, but you were more insistent, for example, on the university side of things?
I think the university side of things does give people an opportunity to find out more about themselves anyway, away from home, but it's much safer because they're in a secure environment. There's pastoral care going on. Mum and dad are at the end of the phone or in the car, and we have jumped in our car and shot down to wherever one of our children was having a problem and sorted it out, and either brought them home for a few days or left them there or probably gave them more money. Much easier. I mean, what you've got to know is my mother took me to the Northern Line at Morden, and I got on a tube when I was 16 with a backpack and a case, and I got myself to Casablanca because I got on the tube and I went to Folkestone, and from Folkestone I went to France, and from France I travelled through on a coach. And in Algiers, I got on another coach and I went further south to Casablanca, and at the bus garage, there was the family to meet me. And I did that all on my own. Never gave it a second thought. But you could do that sort of thing then. I wouldn't let my children get on the train on the Northern Line at 16 now, unaccompanied. So it was a very different world. And there were no mobile phones, and there was nobody to keep tags on me. And I just went and did it.
But no regrets.
None whatsoever. The only regret was that I wasn't around to say to my parents, like, you can't move me to Essex because I can't continue with the same A levels and I won't be able to go to university. That was a major, and always has been, a major regret. And there were things I could have done. I could have done the A level at night school, and I just didn't. I really should have gone off for 3, and maybe done a postgraduate degree. I don't know, which is what one of my children went on to do. She's got 3 degrees. But I think my experience tells me that if you're willing and able and are looking for opportunities, they are there. You may not be the legitimate route that everybody else follows. If you need to find your way through, there are ways of doing it, and that remains today.
How much time did you spend in the HR space?
A lot, because when I left college, I had a diploma in law and secretarial French. So I went into a legal practice and became a PR to a lawyer, and through her I became a paralegal. So I used to go with her to court and dish out the papers that she wanted or check on the witnesses or whatever. I did the backroom stuff. And then from there I went to another law firm, and they asked me to I took an interest in HR in terms of recruiting people, inducting people, making sure that they understood what the politics and the dynamics of the business were. And then I went and worked for a pharmaceutical company who insisted that I do this 2-year diploma at Birkbeck College, and they paid for it. And so I qualified there. And then when I went to the Met, having been with victim support, I then went on to the Met. And when it was clear that I was heading up this volunteer programme and I needed to have a much more legal understanding of employment law, because I was recruiting 40 managers and recruiting volunteers, and there's a big difference between paid staff and volunteers, they sent me on a refresher course as well. It was the people side of HR that fascinated me. I wasn't so bothered with the paperwork and the legitimate side of it all. It was the talking to people, the encouraging of people, putting the right peg in the right hole, because you can do all sorts of damage if you make a mistake. It was that aspect that really fascinated me. So when I got to the Met and I started developing this volunteer programme, my HR experience was really, really fundamental to what I was doing. But I didn't want to do it exclusively. But I've never lost an awareness and an understanding of how things should work when we do recruit people in a paid role. Very different to how we recruit people in a volunteering role.
Right. The recruitment side of things for HR in your first post when you were properly managing HR.
Yeah.
Were you interviewing?
Oh, yeah.
The whole process?
Yeah. I was interviewing. I worked for a company that produced food from raw materials. And so we had a factory and we had an office side. And my role as HR manager was to recruit both facilities. And one of the things I used to do was liaise with the local job centre and say that we've got, I don't know, 10 vacancies for factory hands, and can you arrange 30 interviews for me, and I'll come down for 3 days and go through them and find our factory hands. Or I might go to a local recruitment agency and say we need a data analyst for the office, and again I'd sift through the applications, I'd interview them, induct them when they joined. Whether it was the factory hand or the data analyst, it didn't matter. The issue with that was I grew personally fond of all the people I took into the business, and there came a time, which is when I left, where we had to reduce those numbers, and I had to actually make a lot of, well, the theory was I made lots of people redundant. By supporting them through the process and enabling them to find roles elsewhere, I actually managed to narrow it down to 2 that we couldn't source anywhere else out of a workforce of about 100 people. So it really, really bothered me though, and that's why I left, and that's why I came out of HR, because mind the good stuff. It's lovely ringing somebody up and saying, hey, you've got a job, good news, and you've got these benefits, and can you start Monday? It's a very different side of it when you've got to tell somebody they're going to lose their job. The job's redundant. It's horrible, and I didn't like it at all. So I didn't do it.
Is that process of onboarding people in companies from receiving their CV, cover letters, interviews, are there any key indicators that stand out of sort of red flags or green flags for people during this kind of process that stayed with you?
The 2 words that come to my mind immediately are be truthful. There is no good flanneling, waffling, playing around with the truth a little bit on your application, because it will bite you in the bum later on. And so often, one of the things I did when I joined the food facility was check that people who had the degrees they said they had actually did. So I used to phone the universities and ask them to check their record. Well, I can't tell you how many people tripped up. And, it was such an elementary, simple thing to do. And it's not really that it was a bother to me that they didn't have the qualification they had said they had, although that was bad enough. It was the fact they lied. And you think to yourself, if this is not going to be true, what else is? And I'm not going there. So be truthful. Think about the ethos of the role and the company you're thinking about joining. Are you really, really going to be honest and be able to buy into it? If it's something that does really float your boat, make sure at your interview you've got relevant questions to ask about that organisation. Do some research. One of the questions I used to ask, and people fell over time after time, was what have you looked up? How have you researched our company? What do we do? How many people do we employ? What sort of money do we make every year? What's the turnover? What products do we produce? So many people haven't bothered. And again, there's got to be a bit of a spark of interest into what the whole aim of the company is. And if that's not there, it's never going to work. So being truthful on your application, at your interview, be respectful at your interview, say good morning, reach out to shake hands, ask if you can take your jacket off. Now, I know that's old fashioned, but in the Met, when I was there, people were not allowed to take their jackets off when they came in for an interview. And if they did, they got marked down without asking, that is. There are things that are still old-fashioned but make an impression, I would imagine. I haven't done it for a long time. But nonetheless, if you're trying to waffle your way through, it's never going to work.
Okay, so that's kind of interesting. So the path then from the HR role, which you became slightly disenchanted with when it came to the firing rather than hiring side, can you talk about that transition?
Well, what happened was, because I think my GP said I'd blown my gasket because I had a bit of a wobble after making all these people redundant. I just needed to rest. I worried about it overnight. It was too much for me to manage. So I took 3 months off from that. In fact, I left that company. I took what I intended to be was a sabbatical to recharge my batteries, really. But I lasted about 6 weeks, and I did all the galleries, and I went to all the cinemas, and I had the lunches with the ladies, and I got bored silly after 6 weeks. So then I decided to volunteer. And that's when I became involved with victim support. And I was asked to join Snaresbrook Crown Court as a volunteer in the witness service. And bearing in mind I'd had that experience in the legal practices before and the HR side, it sort of worked quite well. But there was an awful lot to learn, especially about the impact of crime. And when you're sitting with a victim who's scared silly about going into court to give evidence, and they might have to wait 3 days, and you can't talk to them about the evidence. That's really verboten, but you talk to them about everything else. But when it comes to their moment of going into court, you can, if they wish, accompany them into the court. And I used to sit and hear about the most horrific things that I had. Of course, you make such assumptions, which was a lesson I did learn, never to make assumptions, because you hear such dreadful things coming out of this person's mouth that you've been talking to for 3 days. But anyway, I worked through that with them, and it was through my experience there that I then got to know, like I said, the borough commander of the local police service, who was setting up what he called a witness care unit in the police station. Before that, I'd gone to Waltham Forest to the Magistrates Court and managed that. It was a paid role by then. And I designed it and introduced volunteers there. Then we had, because the borough commander wanted me to join the Met and pretty much do the same for his team, I had to go with him to Scotland Yard and deliver presentation on the value, pound, shillings and pence always, of what I was proposing, and how the investment in that money would reward the Met in the ways they wanted to hear. So we talked about community engagement, we talked about diverse people being very afraid of the police, but learning through their volunteering that actually they were really, really good people.
Was one of your responsibilities making sure that that money was apportioned, budgeted in the right way, spent in the right way?
Like so many public sectors, the police are funded by government and they get a budget every year. And it's really up to the commissioner and his hierarchy all the way down how to actually spend the funding that the government are giving them that year. And it was because we were leading up to the games, and it was because community engagement levels were not as good as they should be, and also because the police had recently introduced a project called Safer Neighbourhood Policing, where every single borough and every single ward in each borough had its own policing team. I mean, it was amazing. So bobbies on the beat wherever you looked. Because of that, they wanted to improve the public's awareness of the concept of policing. So my volunteer programme came right at the right time, because it offered a bridge for the public to actually come into the police station through volunteering and see for themselves what was going on. That was the value as far as the police were concerned, as well as getting jobs done that wouldn't have been done otherwise, because there wasn't, and jobs that were enhancing core policing rather than taking away paid work, because we had to be very careful. And the unions were always keeping an eye on us, that we weren't stopping people earning a living or earning overtime. What the volunteers did and didn't get paid for was to enhance what the core policing team were doing. So the money was extensive, because I had a manager in every single borough, and I had managers in special directorates. I had about 40 managers who were on a salary. And then the volunteers themselves, no, they didn't get paid, but they needed training. We needed to advertise and market for them. We needed me to manage them, and I had a team of 4 centrally managing them. We were all paid. So it was a hefty old budget that I was responsible for, but the money ultimately came from on high, if you like, and it was part of the government's budget to the Met.
Now, the MPS is a very hierarchical organisation. How was your experience of navigating that hierarchy?
I don't think the Met is alone in public sector organisations in having a layer of hierarchy. It seems to be, whether it's the water board or the electricity board or trains or the gas service, that they're all hierarchical layers of management. Hospitals, look at, what the argument at the moment is, we've got too many chiefs and not enough Indians. So it's not unusual for that sort of organisation to be managed in that way. The Army, the Air Force, they're all like it. My difficulty was that I was coming into a world where the public just weren't understood as being good people, because the only people that the Met officers came up against were those that were guilty of some misdemeanour. And it was very difficult to convince them that people just wanted to give their time for free, not because they had any ulterior motive in terms of criminality, but actually wanted to do good and give something back. So many volunteers had had good experiences through their court experience, maybe, of being supported by police officers, and they just wanted to give something back. So I had to really navigate my way through layers and layers of hierarchy. But because I got endorsed by the boss, it happened. But it was up to me to make sure that people felt the passion that I had, and that it was a worthwhile thing to get involved in. There were quite a few times where a volunteer was let down by a unit because they weren't engaging with them, they weren't treating them as they should have been. And I used to steam on in and say, right, volunteer out, you've had it, we're not putting another one in there.
So there was resistance then to the...
Absolutely there was, at the beginning. And then, of course, with the change to cost of living, that money had to spread really widely, and mine was an enhancement. It was a luxury. It wasn't really a core policing opportunity. So it got disseminated, and once I'd left, I used to hear over the months and years that followed that it really, special constables remained and the cadets remained, but the Met Volunteer Programme really didn't. It's not, I don't even know now if it exists at all, but in very small part if it does exist now. But we were riding on the crest of a wave because we were supporting them for the Olympic Games, and also because the value of a member of the public coming into a police station at that time and understanding the good that was going on and taking that back out to their communities in the way they wanted to share it. Like I said earlier, the trade unions were very, very concerned that any involvement that me, my managers or my volunteers had to be basically on volunteering and enhancing what people were doing, but we couldn't actually get involved in any way in core policing activities, and we didn't. We found enough to do without getting involved. So no, we weren't. I tell you, one thing I do remember was going to work on the morning of 7/7, which was the day before the games the day after the games were announced that they were going to be in London. And I was on the tube going up to Scotland Yard to work, normal day. And it was just horrible. It was just horrible because I had to walk in the end from quite a long way through London to get to a safe place. But I had all my managers ringing me saying, what should we do? Where should we go? What should we do with the volunteers? They're all here. We're told we can't go out. It was horrific. It was really horrific. But it did make all of us realise the amazing work that the Met Police did and still do. But no, we weren't involved.
Speaking to young people who are listening to this conversation, I wonder if you had a piece or some pieces of advice that you would like to share with a young person who's embarking on their career.
I really envy them. I really envy them. The world is there. I mean, I've got a son at the moment who lives with his family in New Zealand, and we talk 2-3 times a week, and they hop on a plane, I hop on a plane. The world is open to everybody, and I really envy young people that opportunity. So I would say, don't sit in your own backyard. Go where the opportunities are. Don't hesitate. If something comes across your path that you think is going to give you a different perspective on life, a different experience, go for it. Not so bothered about how much money you're earning, more whether it floats your internal boat and it's something that you feel is important for you. And don't listen to anybody else. Listen to what you're hearing in here. If you find that you take on a role and it's not working for you, or you agree to do a piece of work and you're given a time limit and you're not going to achieve that time limit, be honest about it. Always be honest with yourself and your employer as to where you are. Always ask your employer for help. If you're really struggling or you don't understand or something's come across your desk that you might want to know more about, ask. Your employer isn't going to think less of you. They're going to think more of you if you're trying to do that bit better in your role. Don't carry it all. Nobody knows everything about everything. And I think the other big thing is your job should, of course not completely, but your job should have an element of fun. You should be able to be passionate about some of it, not all of it, but there should be a payback for what you're doing. And if you're waking up on a Sunday night thinking, well, I'll go to work tomorrow, I really don't want to go, it's an effort. You need to be thinking, is this the right role for you? I can say this now, I've been retired umpteen years, but I remember being thrilled on a Monday morning that I was going to work. And I used to think to myself, if this feeling ever goes, I've got to stop. And that's why I did stop. Because after the Olympic Games and the money started to be a bit less obvious in my job, and it was more of a struggle, I thought, I'm going to go on a high and I'm going to go with these lovely memories. And so be honest with yourself. I know I keep saying the same thing, but it's a big deal because you compare yourself to your colleagues, your peers. We're all different. And we all, if we're open to opportunities, who knows where they're going to lead, but go with the flow. Allow yourself to.
Sue-Rich, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate our conversation.
Okay, anytime.